Hi, I'm Jonathan Nussman. I am a singer,
Mm-hmm.
and
Great. And you?
My name is Kyle Adam Blair, and I'm a pianist.
Yeah, and how do you all know each other?
we met in 2014 at UCSD in the doctoral program in the music department there. Kyle, you were a couple of years ahead of me.
Yes, I got there in 2011, and at the time I was a graduate student assistant accompanying the voice students at
Yeah.
UC San Diego. So right from Jonathan's arrival, we started working together pretty closely.
Well, I think that's an interesting kind of entry point for you, Kyle. So how did you get involved with working with singers? Because it is now primarily what you do. You're not you kind of turned away from solo concertizing and do mostly collaborative work, which we are eternally grateful for, if I may speak for all singers. So how did you get into that side of music making?
The most important thing for me was the feeling of rehearsal, and the feeling of being in the practice room was a lonely one often, and given that the piano and the piano repertoire, the canonic repertoire, it is very easy for pianists to make careers out of hermetizing themselves. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's very easy for pianists to spend their life honing music by dead white men,
Mm-hmm.
and never interact with another musician nor with a living composer.
Right.
And so I found that collaboration was incredibly important to me, but also through working with some instrumentalists and with some singers, I found that not only were singers capable of an immediate and more beautifully dramatic expression.
Yeah, that's right, violinist.
But also working with text. I mean, I'm a glutton for information.
Yeah.
When I perform, as many plates as I can try to spin, I like to do that. And so text just gave me another way to interact with expression, and thus my love affair with singers and song.
Well, speaking of text,
Yeah.
Jonathan, how did you come to? How did this piece make? I guess when did you first hear it, and why pick it up? And in the first place, it's like really hard.
Yeah. I was putting together a recital of music that I wanted to do all French composers. I had this piece that Kyle and I were working on that was sort of like an anthology of songs by a lot of different sort of early 20th century French composers, and I was looking to build a program around that. And I knew that I definitely wanted to include something by a living French composer. And a friend of mine recommended that I check out, just in a sort of blanket statement, the music of Pascal Dussepin. I wasn't very familiar with him at the time. And so I was looking into his sort of repertoire, and I saw, oh, he has this song cycle for baritone and piano. Let me check it out. Not realizing that it was, 70 minutes long.
An opera.
Incredibly epic. I sat down and I listened to it, and I loved it, and sort of had this feeling that it would be very good for me both vocally and artistically. It sort of meshed with things that I'm interested in musically, and it was of course way too long to add to that program, but it sort of became a sort of aspirational piece for me. Kyle and I began working on it, I think in 2015 was when we first started looking at individual songs from the larger cycle, and then performed it in 2018.
Yes.
No, 2019, sorry.
Yeah.
Exactly a year ago.
You're exactly
2 years ago.
like today.
Exactly 2 years ago. The 11th.
The 11th, yeah.
2019.
Oh man, well, happy anniversary, bon anniversaire. Oh. What are some of the vocal challenges in this thing? Other than duration.
Yeah, I would say the biggest one is
Breath.
duration.
Yeah.
The stamina required to sing. Of course, I don't sing for the entire 70 minutes, but when I do sing, it's often very, very intense.
Yeah.
And so stamina, and then I would also say the biggest challenge is sort of maintaining a sort of through a line of dramatic trajectory through the whole thing. The piece has very, very long, very, very slow sections, particularly in the first half, that require a lot of focus in order to sort of keep them moving forward at their very, very slow pace. And then there are brief moments of very, very fast, sometimes very violent music that just pop out of nowhere. And being able to make those shifts convincingly and also musically effectively in terms of the ensemble is very challenging.
Yeah, and then like diving into the text. I mean, it's a French translation of Friedrich Nietzsche, right? Like it's dense.
Mm-hmm.
It is dense. And so, what was your process for getting the text translated in a way that makes poetic sense in English?
The poetry for me was a real sort of revelation. Obviously, the thing that drew me to the piece first really was the music. I listened to it and did not listen to it with a translation on hand. My ability to understand German is very sort of elementary level, so I was really attracted first and foremost to the music and the vocal writing. Then, as I began to sort of delve into the piece and its text, I discovered that Nietzsche's poetry is amazing. I always thought of Nietzsche as this sort of like philosophical writer, a writer of sort of novels as well, and did not realize that his poetry was often so expertly crafted. His ability to sort of set up these ideas of philosophical enlightenment or growth of the sort of like mental and spiritual state of an individual in just a few short lines, to me, I found just really, really amazing, revelatory, I would say. And Dussepin, the composer, he selected the texts. They come from Nietzsche's entire lifetime of writings, including some works that are not published in sort of like official publications, sort of taken from sort of his sort of fragmentary notebooks, as well as some of his major writings like Also sprach Zarathustra and other major works. And so the composer, Dussepin, has sort of assembled them into this very, very loose, I would say, not narrative, it's more like an emotional trajectory. It tells us a story that's not about plot, it's more about personal growth, personal change, sort of moving towards enlightenment. And I just think that it's very beautifully done. As many of the poetry, or a lot of the text comes from works, obscure places from Nietzsche's writing. Much of it didn't have an English translation, so it became a big project for me to go and make the translations that you'll see in the subtitles of the performance.
And also we have Pamela Narbona, who is an expert translator of art song text. She's translating it into Spanish as well, so we'll have both English and Spanish, which I think is really awesome.
Yeah.
Very rarely done.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the thing that's so fascinating about just the simple act of translation is that the translator has to make decisions that ultimately affect the final product. And I think that there's a really beautiful parallel between translating poetry from one language into another language, as well as translating poetry from the written word into music. And I think that process, there's a lot of similarity between it. And so it was a real joy for me to work on these English translations at the same time that I was working on the musical translations and seeing how they informed each other. How Dussepin's interpretation of the poetry manifested in his music, which then became sort of like a guidepost for me to understand.
Well, I mean, I like that you sort of talk about the musical translation too, right? That I think people sort of take it, not necessarily for granted, but that music is language, music is a mode of communication. So how would you describe Dussepin's language? What is his, how does he paint? How does he tell a musical story?
I would say through the piano writing and through the vocal writing, what I'm finding are two main types of music that are, very classically thought of and rhetorical. The first one being these dense harmonies that, especially in the slower musics that Jonathan mentioned, play a tremendous role in dictating a sense of pace in the ways that not only rhythmically these harmonies present themselves, but also the speed or lack of speed with which the colors change. It can be kaleidoscopic, but sometimes a very slow kaleidoscope. And then, taken into context with the pacing of the delivery of the text itself, which is also a very interesting way of thinking about the composer and the poet interfacing. It's just like the pace at which where Dussepin decides to introduce an interlude, have the text stop for an amount of time, play a really significant role in the way that we hear the text. So there's this harmonic language, but also, especially in the faster musics, and in some of the interjections in the piece of these violent interruptions, there's counterpoint. And in that counterpoint, Dussepin is so specific about, in particular, phrasing, which notes go together. The rhythms can often be complicated. And he's also very, very clear about the articulation, almost of every single note. But often in each phrase, he'll have at least one accent mark to show you where is the musical syllabic stress in each phrase. And oftentimes it's bizarre, and that's one of the challenges. Oftentimes it's off kilter. Some of the challenges in the piece are the rhythmic counterpoint between the text and these strange interjections of the piano part that have the assertion and gravity of a downbeat or a pulse, but is completely off the grid. And so that in and of itself is a very particular and difficult rhetoric that can, I think, also kind of parallel some of the difficulties and particularities about Nietzsche's language.
Densities of Nietzsche's language.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wonder if you both can maybe, this last question, if you can talk to the process of putting together a live performance in a pandemic, and I guess your anticipation of what is going to happen for a live stream. Like, have you ever done a performance in this type of a setting? And what's it been like to revisit it and for this specific context?
You want to go first, Kyle?
I can go first, yeah. I think within in general, coming back to the piece, I think the first time around, there was a big concern about doing it right or doing it justice or uh, getting it, as close to maybe the composer's intention as possible, figuring out what that is in a really big piece. But having done that work, coming back to it this time, I think for me feels the concern becomes more now. How is it ours? In a way that perhaps it wasn't so much before. Like it was like we were reaching at it before. It was like a fruit on a tree that we were
Yeah.
reaching at, and we got. And now it feels like we have it. It feels like we have it like
No
in the
brag.
hands, and so now we can play. It feels well. It just feels like we're well, you know, it feels like it becomes something else, and the focus becomes individual and collaborative, and what can we do with it? But in terms of you know in these constraints, it is really wonderful to take on a big project that in terms of the personnel it requires is relatively small. So being able to put on a big project with two musicians uh, is is probably the best case scenario right now in terms of trying to do big work. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm.
so that's been it's the fact that it's plausible and possible and happening um, is a big source of gratitude for me, and I think you know these like kind of full scale big productions with lots of people just aren't so feasible. So being able to really sink our teeth into a big project like this is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Kyle just said. Coming back to it feels in many ways like coming back to something that is very familiar and comfortable, but also, we're it's 2 years later, so we have changed in small and large ways as humans and as musicians, and learned some things. I spent a year writing a dissertation on this piece since we last performed it, so I learned a lot about it that I didn't know in the first performance. And those things can't help but change the our approach to performance. Kyle and I just think we feel a little bit more comfortable with the material and comfortable with each other in the material as well. I can be totally upfront. The hardest part for me is not necessarily knowing what to sing, but knowing what to sing when. Is a really challenging part of this piece because the rhythms can be so free and so sometimes kind of esoteric, and just knowing that Kyle knows this piece as well as I do, and that if I come in, a beat and three quarters early or late, he will be fine, and he will just
I want that to be made clear that professional musicians make mistakes all the
yes.
time, all the
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yes. And especially in a piece like this that is musically, extremely challenging, but we also want it to be, as a singer, like I am acting, I am thinking about expressing the text, and so there's lots of sort of like balls in the air, or as Kyle used earlier, his spinning plates metaphor. And so sometimes mistakes happen, and I know that Kyle will always save me, so I'm very appreciative of that. Um, but as we come back to it in like this time, I the other like great joy of this has been, this has been the first time since early March that I've been able to make music with another person in the same room at the same time. I haven't had that opportunity in a while, and so that's just been the best part of this. Kyle and I, we've worked together for a long time, and it just feels like family making music. So, I've been lucky. I've had a lot of work during the pandemic, but it's been a lot of recording myself with this microphone and digitally putting voices together or whatever. So it's been really, really good being able to collaborate uh, organically and in the moment. Um, Although it's totally awful singing with a mask on.
Yeah. Is there anything else you guys would like to kind of like a little button, a little punctuation mark at the end of the sentence? Anything else about this experience that has maybe surprised you or been particularly challenging apart from the logistics of singing with a mask on? I,
I'm just excited to perform in a space that the only audience is a camera. And we were talking about this in rehearsal yesterday. It's just very cool to have a performance space that has no orientation, that it is completely 360 degrees. And to me, that's just really exciting. We've designated parts of the room as downstage left and upstage right or whatever, but it was completely arbitrary because the space is completely immersive, and that's really very cool and very exciting to me. It's a great piece. I'm appreciative to Project Blank for mounting it. This is only the second time it's been performed in the United States.
ever.
So
Whoa! And the first time was you guys as well.
yeah, we were the first time. Yeah. I mean, Kyle and I were talking about this. I mean, we're basically one of maybe three pairs of musicians who perform this piece now. So
That's great.
excited to bring it to some people who've never heard it before.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thank you both so very, very much. We are eternally grateful for your time and your expertise and your dedication to your craft, to the work, to the piece. And I am thoroughly enjoying putting it together with you both. It's been a very long time since I've worked with either of you, and it's been super fun. Back at school, I guess, or in the sandbox. So thank you both so much, and have a good night.
Thank you.
You too.